Welcome back to season 2 of Legal Luminaries, the Paralegal Edition, your go to series for fresh insights into the ever evolving world of paralegal education and legal innovation. I'm your host, Christine Custodio Suero, and with me today is my brilliant co host and fellow paralegal educator, Kelli Radnathy. Today, we're thrilled to sit down with Kelli Raker from the Duke Center of Law and Technology, and we're going to explore how her work at the intersection of legal tech, access to justice, and responsible AI is reshaping the legal landscape and what it means for all of us educators and students and working paralegals. So let's dive in. So, Kelli, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here. And let's just get started with your journey. How did you find your way into the legal technology, community justice, and responsible AI space? And then what sparked your passion in this?
Thanks, Christine. Excuse me. Thanks, Christine. I love that you asked me how I got involved in this because I think that people who've known me in other parts of my career also have that question. When I was a kid, my dad was someone who described me as like the person who could intermediary between tech and people. And so, when I grew up, technology was not necessarily always a given. I was a millennial, so it was always very new and interesting. And so as I look back, it's easy for me to see some kind of themes around my interests and my areas of kind of passion and as well as my personality. And so I actually came to Duke Law School about 7 years ago after I'd gotten kind of burned out from working in crisis response and community education focused around sexual violence and domestic violence. And I had worked at a nonprofit startup that actually closed, worked with a lot of lawyers in that process. And it had been centered on building leaders and building connections in the community across issues like food insecurities. And so I had this experience with building leaders and cohorts of leaders. And when I started at Duke Law, I was thrown into running our Duke Law Tech Lab, which was an accelerator for legal tech companies. And back then, I knew very little about legal tech, but I knew how to build communities, how to leverage subject matter experts, how to build a curriculum and empower and support people in what they were trying to accomplish with their goals. And so it's been really exciting. And that's been such a fun journey to learn more about this. And so in that time, I actually changed the Duke Law Tech Lab to be focused on legal tech generally to more about justice tech, which fits more with my passions and interests and really wanting to kind of make a difference in the world and make sure that what we're doing is changing things for the better for everyone.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that background. And I wanted to kind of get a little bit closer to a project of yours that we had talked about before today, and that is RAILS, which stands for Responsible AI in Legal Services. And as you know, Kel and I have talked about this quite a lot because we say, oh gosh, there's this kind of fear narrative that's being kind of foisted into our legal space, right? And oh, AI is coming for your jobs, paralegals, and oh, this and this, and so we said, let's just back up for a moment and talk about how do we as legal professionals use this Gen AI tool, right, in a responsible, professional, and ethical manner. So your Rails project is something that really spoke to us. Can you tell our listeners what Rails is all about and its mission and what's driving it?
Definitely. So Rails was started about a year to year and a half ago through our Duke Center on Law and Technology. And so we really wanted this to be a collaborative network that was going to help advance responsible, ethical, and safe use of AI. And so at the time, we were really hearing from leaders across the legal profession, folks who, like you said, were like totally scared of AI and like, no, we can't possibly use this. Which in the legal profession is also how people felt about fax machines and email and credit card processing and a whole lot of other technologies in our past and recent past. And then we also had folks who were like, look at this awesome new tool. Yeah, it has its flaws, but look at all these cool things that we can do. And so we saw just such a range of how people were approaching this. And clients and the general public felt that way too. And so we really heard these pain points from leaders all around the industry and saying like AI has this capacity to do really interesting things in law. Um, But we also have to make sure that it's going to build access to everyone and not just the people who already have access to the best technologies and the best tools. And so we were talking to legal aid organizations, big law firms, small law firms, in-house counsel, the courts, everybody in academia, and everyone's kind of like scrambling to adopt this, but also feeling really kind of unanchored about how they were going to approach it. And so our center's director, Professor Jeff Ward, brought together this initial steering committee of people from all across the industry. And they were sharing stories of like, I would go to one meeting and a client is saying, do not use AI, do not use my data in AI, do not help me with my legal problems with AI. And then they go to the next meeting and that client would say, well, if you don't use AI, then I'm going to leave because I want you to be doing this in the most efficient and best way possible. And I don't want to pay for you to spend all your time to do these sort of tasks that AI can do. And even especially clients who are representing AI tools that, folks are actually building in their companies. So that's what we were faced with. And also a place where we didn't really have a lot of guidance yet about how to use it. And so we wanted to bring people together to provide some resources, to provide some guidance and guardrails, essentially, that's the name rails,
Mhm.
to help lawyers and paralegals and really everyone across the legal industry be able to like feel comfortable um, analyzing what AI could do and know what it could do well, and find ways to have it be part of their workflow in ways that were responsible and ethical, and not just like adopting to adopt it and not just saying no because we're afraid of it, but really trying to take a measured and intentional and thoughtful approach to it. And so we've done that mostly through some different working groups and building out some resources, which I'm happy to talk about.
Awesome. I mean, it sounds like, this impact is being felt across, within our legal profession, but also that legal adjacent, which is really, that's really incredible because it's like that real world impact, right? So, Kelli, would you mind kind of going into some maybe real world examples of how Rails is influencing the legal field, especially in terms of making sure, like you said, how AI is used ethically and responsibly to build this collaborative network and of resources.
Absolutely. So the very first resource that we put out was an AI use in courts tracker. And there are actually a couple of these out there that are being maintained. One of them is by Ropes and Gray, another one is by LexisNexis. But we built our resource because we kept hearing about how confusing it was when judges would issue a wide variety of types of orders saying, you can use this, you can't use this, you have to disclose this. And this was coming about primarily because lawyers were submitting AI generated memos, briefs, everything with hallucinations in them, with cases that just didn't exist at all. And so, we built this tracker to break down by jurisdiction, where are there court orders saying you can or cannot use AI? And people didn't even always say what kind of AI, right? Like, are we allowed to use spell check? Or are we talking about generative AI, right? Like, that's really what people are worried about. Um, so we built this in a way that folks can download the whole table of all of the court orders and perform their own analysis on it if they want. So we share our analysis and tell you how many there have been and when they've been released and all that. Ropes and Gray has a really great map on their version of it, but we wanted to have this raw data so that other academics like ourselves could run that report if they wanted to. But also the average person could just kind of look through and be like, okay, I'm working in Washington. What does that mean? What court orders have come there? How does that apply to me as an attorney or a self-represented litigant or whoever you might be as you're trying to understand what's going on? So some of it is just trying to like grasp all the things that are happening around responsible AI in the US primarily. And we do have some international orders on there as well. That's just one
Wow.
example of trying to give this like concrete tool for people to keep up with everything.
Wow. I mean, it's like wrapping your arms around, this large beast, right? I mean, and how do you do that, gracefully? And so, looking at that from the educator's perspective, right? For our audience of educators, when we look at those frameworks or competencies that you're realizing from Rails, how can we incorporate that into, our paralegal training programs to really enhance the output that we have from those programs?
Definitely. So I think one of the most helpful resources that we've put out is around use cases for AI, for Gen AI. And so we started with this list of, I think, over 50 or 60 potential use cases for Gen AI in legal. And we have a working group who put their brains together and wrote up some one-page kind of documents about some of the different use cases that they felt they had some expertise on. And we've only published 10. We have about 6 or 7 more in the works at the moment. And we want to keep publishing more and more of them. But these are one-pagers that just say, like, what's the use case? Why would you want to use it? What's the benefits? Why is it different in legal compared to any other industry? And what are some best practices or frequently asked questions that we might have? And so, they of course cannot cover every use case. The AI is, happening so fast. And we did, date stamp them, time stamp them, because everything is changing quickly. But this is a really great resource for someone who maybe hasn't really thought a lot about AI, isn't sure like why you'd want to use it for something. I've actually shared them with colleagues outside of legal, but who work with attorneys a lot, to just say like, hey, you might have this in your back pocket as a way to talk to them. But these use cases are a really great starting point for someone who either hasn't done much or who's interested in helping people get up to speed on how you might use AI as kind of a partner, as a tool with you in your workflows. And I love the questions that they include in there, like why would you not want to use a summarization tool in a meeting? Why would you, I think another great example that I think is really lovely is like agreement intelligence, like much more legal specific examples, but then also like general ones that anyone could use, which is great. So for example, we have one on like using AI to help draft emails, for example. And one of our questions is like, do I need to alert the recipient that I used AI to do this? And part of the answer is like, not always, but also you might want to track when you're using that for your own records. But your organization should have a policy on this. And if they don't, that's something you should talk to them about. So I think this is just a way to kind of help people start to think about what this technology looks like in everyday practice, and also how to stay up on it as it continues to change.
Yeah, I love you said that, because that future proofing ourselves, right? Future proofing our future legal workforce, but also future proofing ourselves for those of us that are currently here in the workforce.
Yeah.
And when we think about our current workforce and some of the big concerns we're looking at with these different tools that are innovating in front of us, how does Rails tackle those? Concerns like bias and transparency and explainability. And I want to say this in a way. So I went to a CLE this week on sort of the dark side of AI, and one thing they were talking about in there was, the ability for this bias, and how do we train it out, right, without acknowledging it? And so how does that tie into that sort of ethical responsibility that we as legal professionals carry while utilizing these tools?
Absolutely. So we have some really great other initiatives out of our center that relate to this as well, and I can talk about that. But I think for me, like this technology is changing so fast. I actually still remember about a year ago when a technologist asked me if I had heard about RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, the first time, and I was sitting there like, no, should I know what that is? And really feeling kind of dumb, honestly. Like, I work in this topic all the time. Why don't I know what this is? And now it was in many conference presentations I was at last week for the Equal Justice Conference, for example. And so RAG is one way that you can address the hallucinations, for example, that can happen in AI by using the tool and teaching the tool to only rely on content from a certain set of information. And so this is the retrieval part of that. And I'm not a technologist, so I'm not the person to explain that properly. There are many better resources out there. But this is just one thing that has changed in the last 12 months, really pretty drastically, at being able to reduce hallucinations. And so, for example, our Legal Aid of North Carolina has a new chatbot tool called LIA, Legal Information Assistant, and they use that method. So they have this chatbot that's trained on all the data on their website, which, as we know, is a lot of information, and most websites that are facing the public, right? Legal services organizations in particular. And the chatbot is also trained to only respond to certain types of questions. And so if it gets something outside of what it's not supposed to do, it's supposed to not answer that. And so one thing that's really cool is that my colleague Keith Porcara, who's a professor at the law school, has been actually doing an audit of Leah this semester, and hopefully his report is going to come out soon. This is supposed to come out in June. And so they've been going beyond correctness, actionability, completeness, accessibility. These are all things they've been looking at. But they've been also examining the choices that actually go into the way that it was designed and deployed, even as well, and how it also fits into kind of all the other resources that are offered to folks who are coming to Legal Aid of North Carolina with a legal question. And so they have shared data with us. This is really fantastic. And we've had a class of 6 students who've been involved in it as well. So it's both a learning opportunity for our law students and also this like real life way that we're trying to ensure that this tool that's really being used across our whole state is good and is reliable. And so this is something that I'm really excited to hear what the audit comes with at the end of their results. And I think that we're going to see more and more of this as time goes on, because many of the folks that are doing these sorts of analyses, it's still really new. And so people are still designing them, and we're really early on in this kind of how do we understand not only how it happens, but then how do we fix it?
You know what?
From the dark side CLE, one of the things they were talking about is how prompts, the prompts that somebody might be using are now becoming possibly, discoverable or question, and when we think about that, then the bias or transparencies or explainability behind what pathway we took, right? It's going to
Mhm.
directly link into these responsibilities, like you said. So sorry,
Yeah.
it's super interesting how you are on the pulse of all of these different sort of extensions of the initiative. So it's really cool that there's one place that we can go to find out this information. So, Christine, I know you wanted to kind of take this and talk about access to justice here because of this advocacy and this improving it, right? So I'll let you go ahead and ask her some questions because I know you have
Yeah,
to go.
absolutely, because that's an area where we all three really have a big interest. And I would love to shift the conversation into that kind of access to justice realm. But Kelli, we are looking forward to that resource that will come out hopefully, in June. And as Kelli and I are really early tech adopters, so we appreciate Duke and your state, North Carolina, really leading the way and pioneering these types of efforts for all of us in the legal industry. And, as the three of us, all three of us, we are all advocates for improvements to access to justice, right? And also this community based legal support. We know this and are familiar of this by way of community justice workers, as Cal and I have been exploring these legal practitioner programs, which offer limited scope legal services and legal advice to the public, right? And we see it in like 20 plus states now. It's really, there's a momentum, a movement, if you will, for these types of programs. And so we were wondering, what's the role of trained paraprofessionals, non-lawyers, if you will, in closing that justice gap, especially with this type of technology that's available?
Such a great question. And I love that you said it's a movement, because I think that that's such a great word for it, because it's growing slowly over time. Um, you know, there are so many great leaders in the community-based justice workers movement. I've been to a conference recently with I4J out of Arizona and Utah. I was just connected with some folks at Frontline Justice. They have a new groundwork portal online where you can connect with other folks who want to be in that space, who maybe want to be a community justice worker or partner with them in some way. But I think it's so important that everyone see that part of their role is to solve this access to justice gap. I can give you the data from LSC's Justice Gap Survey. I hope for most people in your audience, I don't have to explain why there's a justice gap. But I think it's just so important that we recognize everyone has a role to play and that things are continuing to change in terms of what roles we can do. And honestly, like, I don't know what it's going to be like in 5 or 10 years. And I often tell law students I work with that, much like the medical profession has expanded from, doctors and nurses to also include nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. Like, we already have these different varieties of limited scope options that folks can have. And so I think that that is going to be something that, for folks who want to do more, look for those opportunities, look for folks who can partner with you, talk talk to regulators about why that's important to you, because I think we all have people in our lives that we can think of where like they didn't have help when they needed help, that they kind of went it alone and had to figure something out on their own because full legal representation is too expensive for most people. Um, and so we have some great series. Well, I'll back up and say more of my work has been focused on access to justice and technology and unauthorized practice of law. So I have a great series that we've been hosting with IELTS about that intersection in the future of legal services as it relates to technology, because we really think that AI has this transformative potential. But a lot of tech providers are really limited by what is UPL? How does the state define it? How does each jurisdiction define it? Where is that line between legal information and legal advice? And so we've been really exploring kind of what this issue is, and those are being recorded. So if you miss them, you can still access them, which is great. And then we're actually going to have a workshop series that folks are going to work on a couple of different ways to actually try to change the regulatory landscape. And really that specifically has been around like no action letters and issuing prosecutorial guidance related to technology, especially so that we can preserve the kind of integrity function of unauthorized practice of law, but also expand access to justice and make sure that people are getting the legal services that they need.
That's really incredible that Rails is kind of fitting that into its own mission in serving underserved communities, right? And so I can see that integration and that kind of forward focus on the vision of Rails. And I'm wondering too, like how can we as educators and Kelli and myself as practitioners, as paralegals of 20 plus years in the field, how do we collaborate? You said, yes, connect with those folks, right? But I'm wondering
Mhm.
your thoughts on how can we collaborate with these justice organizations to drive that innovation, that equity for those underserved communities? And is Rails, is Duke Law and Tech Center, are you kind of focused on that as well?
Yeah, so one growing area that I'm excited about is the direct to consumer legal tech tools or justice tech tools. And so you might think of this as kind of the role that LegalZoom originated starting, but it's so much more than that now. And even the amount of tools that are out there and the partnerships that are happening between community-based organizations, nonprofits, and justice tech companies, whether they're for profit or public benefit corporation, these partnerships are growing. And so, for example, some nonprofits who are legal services organizations refer to Upsolve for folks to help with their bankruptcy and other financial and debt collection related issues. And this is a really fantastic partnership. They have released all this debt to really help free people, which is amazing. So there's this market for the general public who want to try to solve their legal problems on their own. They're already trying to do this using ChatGPT and Reddit and many other tools. Anything we've given them, people are trying to solve their problems on their own. But a lot of times they need more than that. And sometimes that's where folks like you all might come in. Maybe there's a whole new set of folks that would help people walk through a tech tool or kind of be the second step after they get started with a tech tool. So there's all these really great founders. And I did some research on this a couple of years ago, back in 2022, 2023, and published a report called From Founded to Funded, and really about this experience of being an entrepreneur, some of whom are lawyers, some of whom are technologists, the occasional paralegal, and other folks who are really trying to build products that help people solve a legal problem of their own. It's usually like a very specific piece, right? It's not like a whole, I need representation for a year. It's like, I need help with changing my name. I need help with this eviction that I'm facing. So there's lots of ways that people are building tools and interfaces that allow folks to solve their own problems because there isn't enough people to help them on their own. And there are also a lot of really great colleagues I have around the country who are helping build those tools as well. So there's some great folks at the Stanford Design Lab, and the Suffolk University Law School has a lit lab that does this as well. Really trying to like build tools that are for courts, that are for the general public, that are for nonprofits, kind of like the example I mentioned of Leah. And so this is really the up and coming thing. And so Rails has been putting together sort of a report to help people understand this market and also understand that some of the risks that are coming with that, because this is not perfect. This is still new. But there are really great tools that are already out there that paralegals in particular might be curious about, want to kind of test them and see if they could be of useful or something that they could refer someone to if they can't help them directly. Um, but really just a whole new market, a whole new area of ways that we can help people. And these tools have been around for a little while, and they're going to keep growing. They've already grown so much in the last couple of years.
What I really catch here is this human-centered design, right? And I mean, it's clear that you are an absolute champion for human-centered design, especially in that legal tech space, and Rails as well, right? It's kudos to trailblazing there, because it's imperative. Christine and I firmly stand behind this. You can't AI the human out of humanity, right? And that's really legal services is there to serve humanity. So, what does that really look like, though, in practice, that human-centered design? And how can we as educators help students and learners adopt this human-centered design mindset?
Definitely. I think that's one of my favorite things about talking to founders of justice tech companies is that they do really understand user design. They have a little bit more resources than most of us to create something that people are going to respond to. So I also lead some design derbies, is what we call them, some workshops or sprints with law students. And we host them not just with our Duke Law students, but with folks around the state or around the country. And these are opportunities for students to get into this mindset of human-centered design and really empathize with the people that they're designing for, first and foremost, and also deeply understand the problem. So if you are wanting to solve a problem, if you are an entrepreneur or an innovator, if you are trying to build some sort of process or tool for folks, the very first thing is really about listening to the people experiencing the problem that you're trying to solve. Even if you yourself have dealt with the problem, you're not the only person, right? There's lots of experiences. So first, really fully understanding the problem itself and the experience of those folks. And then being really creative. And I gotta tell you, this is hard for law students and for legal professionals. I've had students say, like, I got to draw today in this workshop. This is so cool. I miss drawing. That creativity is there, but law school kind of like squishes it out of you a little bit. And so it's really fun to be able to give them this opportunity to bring in this creativity. And what that really means is not saying no to the great ideas that kind of come up, because lawyers and law students are so good at saying like, oh, we can't do that because we don't have the resources for that. But early on in that human-centered design process, like you have to be able to dream big and imagine what else could happen in the world. And then the third piece that I think is really important is getting regular user feedback on prototypes. So like continually iterating, continually doing these tiny experiments, trying to improve something. I think this is actually like the best advice I can give anyone who wants to do more AI in their life is to adopt this mindset of being curious and of micro experimenting. So what this means in real life is like taking 5 minutes at your day to learn more about it, to try something out, to test it, and just see what you can learn. Or it might actually be that you want to talk to someone else about it first, right? So being curious about it, read about it, talk about it. You don't have to be a technology genius to be able to do this human-centered design, right? Like you can be the person who comes up with the idea and then partner with someone who knows how to build it. But the process of like designing it so that it actually works for the people you want to help, like this is why we say human-centered design is so important, because you can like sit down and code a website all day, but if no one wants to click on it because it's too hard for them to understand, then the tool you're building isn't any helpful, right?
Right. Well, so, it's interesting how many different innovative tools are being, presented in front of us. And I think it's, exciting to know that our future workforce is getting to test those, right? And help with the development of them, because ultimately that's going to be the community they serve, right? So how about, perfecting that tool is really exciting. So when we're talking about some of these new platforms or tools, any justice tech sort of platforms, tools, features that you think paralegals should really start becoming familiar with? Number one, because attorneys are learning it maybe in their law school curriculums, but also because it's sort of that next wave of innovation.
Yes. So the Justice Tech Association is a really fantastic place to start to just understand what some of the different tools are out there. They have a member directory. And I think it's important to know that like wherever you are working, like whatever your practice area is, there might be tools out there for you, but there actually might not be that many just for your practice area. But we've seen them in personal injury, discrimination, divorce, family law, child custody, wills and estates, small claims court, probate, like all these things, copyright infringement, debt collection, all of that. Um, so there are lots of tools out there, and many of them are just addressing like one piece of that puzzle. And so think about what your practice area is and do some searching. So that could be on the Justice Tech Association website. You could be looking for like a more general open free research tool like the Free Law Project or Describe.ai. And if you are the person who likes a podcast because you're listening to this one, then you might check out the Talk Justice podcast, where they've had lots of different guests who are kind of different pieces of this process. I personally really first got to know about Justice Tech through Hello Divorce, which is originated in California, and actually with the help of paralegals. So it was founded by a family law lawyer who was trying to find ways to just help more people. And so that was kind of piecemealing different parts of the divorce process so that she could actually charge people less money to get help. By having them use technology plus a paralegal and then get referred to a lawyer or a mediator or an accountant or a certified financial professional or a divorce coach, like depending on what that person needed. And so I think that there's really great opportunities to just see like what is growing in the ecosystem and in your practice area, in your interest area, and be willing to reach out. Maybe you could serve on a board of one of these startup companies. Maybe you could just connect with them about their product. I know they would all love to partner and kind of get more engaged with folks who want to either use the tool or just like help them make it better.
And kind of staying along that line of curiosity, right, and building that lifelong learning mindset. I really appreciate you saying that and bringing that forward. And obviously you've shared such great resources for Rails, and you've just given us some resource recommendations for Justice Tech Association. Are there any other additional tools or resources, toolkits that you would recommend? I know we love a podcast, right? So is there anything else that you would want to share with us?
Sure. So the report that I wrote from founded to funded is available on our website, which I think we can put in the show notes. And it's really about Justice Tech overall and kind of why you should know about this new market, essentially. But there's some really great researchers out there. Rebecca Sandifer has done a great job of helping us understand the justice gap. There's some fantastic user design folks like Nicole Braddock and Margaret Hagan, who are really wonderful leaders. These are actually all folks I'd recommend that you bring on your podcast, actually. But these are all folks who are really leaders in this movement around law and innovation. And I also really love a lot of great writings by Lucy Rica, who helped create the Utah Sandbox. And she has this really fantastic article about how states are rethinking the access to justice crisis and how you can do that with evidence-based re-regulation. So I think that this is an exciting time to be following what else is going on. And there's going to always continue to be things to learn, but we're hoping that Rails will continue to be a resource where we're kind of pulling things together. We actually have a whole new spreadsheet on our website that I just posted recently that has a lot of articles, that has resources related to AI, access to justice, and unauthorized practice of law. And I think there's over 300 scholarly articles and news articles kind of related to this intersection. So if you want to dig in, there's lots of options.
I'm about to do a deep dive into that. So thanks for that tip. And I don't know if you have anything in the pipeline for any kind of research or policy work that's helping shape, what you're doing at Rails, excuse me. And, is there anything that you might want to be able to share with us on any upcoming work or projects that you're doing?
Sure. So right now we're really still looking to see what the next phase of Rails is going to be. We've had some really productive working groups that have put out some great resources, and we're also kind of looking to see some additional kind of structures to support this in the future. And so one of them might actually be more individualized fellowships. So if you, for example, wanted to create something that was paralegal focused resources, that would be something that we could partner with you, help you find some resources, potentially get you access to some of the resources we have at Duke and our law school, and also get you connected to the Rails community to be able to do that really well. And that would be something that we would kind of co-produce and co-host with you. And we produce everything with Rails under a Creative Commons license so that folks can access it, because we really want this to be open source as much as possible. So the fellowships are kind of a new thing that we're working on developing right now. And if that's something you might be interested in, I would love to talk to anyone who's curious more about that and kind of help me build it.
So awesome to hear what's, sort of on the horizon here in front of us. Are there any other events or projects that, that we should kind of keep looking out for as, we're looking ahead?
Yeah, it's a great question.
You may have gone over these already because you discussed a lot of them. So, so maybe the better question might be, where this movement is going with responsible use of AI, and that intersection with legal services. How can we as educators, and students and working professionals really prepare to be part of that movement into the future?
Yeah. I think the approach I would want to encourage for everyone beyond just being curious about it is to really think of AI as a tool. And this is something that the ABA's guidance they put out last July 2024 is that AI is really intended to, right now, as it exists, is intended to be an assistant, a partner, a support mechanism. It's a tool. And I think that for folks who are going to really thrive in this next era are going to be the people who are thinking about their workflows, thinking about what kind of new tools they could potentially use, and taking on some leadership and trying out some new things and seeing how it goes and reporting back. There's going to be things that don't work. That's okay. But being willing to try to figure out how do we do this? How do we test it out in an environment where we can do this together with our peers, and really meet the needs in the legal industry that are out there. This is something where we're going to approach this where the AI is this tool that's going to help us do our jobs better in whatever way that looks like. And think of it as an additional kind of legal assistant, even for you.
It's exciting. I mean, the opportunities ahead are just absolutely exciting. Kelli and I did a presentation where we talked about, remember when the internet was just coming up? Because we're that age, right? When it was coming up and people were kind of nervous and scared. And then all of a sudden, e-commerce became a thing. And a whole new industry was born out of that opportunity. So we're excited. Kelli and I are excited for this. And, as we're winding down our conversation with you today, and we are just so thankful that you shared your time, your wisdom, your knowledge with us, and these upcoming exciting projects and opportunities even for us to collaborate in the future. What advice would you give to our educators and even to paralegals who are curious about AI, but are maybe a little bit hesitant or resistant to embrace it? Or do you have any kind of words of wisdom that you would give to them?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to think about how you learn best and then try to find 5 or 10 minutes every day and use a medium that works for you. So if you like to read, sign up for that Substack, get a newsletter in your inbox. If you really need to listen to a podcast or watch a video about something, go that method, right? Or talk to a colleague even if you want to really hear from a technologist about what's working or how someone else uses AI in their work. So find the way that you learn best, because not everybody wants to just read something. Not everybody wants to listen to a podcast. Sorry. But I think that really finding that thing that you can do just for 5 minutes every day, and maybe you'll increase it some days when you have time or decrease it on your busy days. But just carve out a little space to be able to practice with it and to talk to other people about what they're doing, because it's here, it's coming. People are using it for good and for bad right now. And so find a way for you to continue to kind of get some new pieces of information about what's happening with it as much as possible, even if it's in just little chunks each and every day.
Thank you so much, Kelli. And so what is the best way for our listeners to get connected with you, stay in touch with you, and keep up to date on this incredible work that you're doing?
I would love to stay in touch with folks. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think we can put that link in our show notes. And you can also sign up for free to be a part of Rails. Rails.legal is our website. It's a really quick application. And really just for making sure that you're a real person and not a bot. That's about it. And we'd love for you to get our newsletter and hear what else is going on. And you can always get connected with me that way as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelli. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and giving us so much to think about as we continue to develop our paralegal training programs and look into some models like what's going on at Duke Law and Tech Center. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of AAfPE's Legal Luminaries. We hope that today's conversation sparked your curiosity and offered new perspectives on what's possible at the intersection of legal education, tech, and justice. You'll find links to all the resources we've discussed in the show notes below. And we want to give a special thank you to Doug Lusk and the National Society for Legal Technology for their continued support in bringing this podcast to life. We'll leave you with this question to ponder. If you had 20 minutes to interview anyone in the legal world, who would it be and why? Please send us your thoughts and suggestions. Until next time, keep learning, connecting, and illuminating that legal landscape. Goodbye for now.